can still hear that laugh. It wasn't cruel in the obvious way, not the sharp, cutting kind that aims to wound. It was worse than that. It was casual, effortless, the kind of laugh that doesn't realize it's building a scar. That day, the house was loud. My uncle had arrived. He always announced, himself with noise, his booming voice echoing down marble halls, the clink of his rings on whiskey glasses, the scent of expensive cigars that didn't quite mask the sweat underneath. He was everything my father wasn't. Where my father was composed, he was careless. Where my father spoke in precise sentences, he barked out laughter between mouthfuls of steak. My father dressed like discretion. My uncle dressed like proof of wealth. Gold watch too big, shirt unbuttoned too low. Stories about yachts that never quite sounded true. But they were brothers. Blood and competition bound them tighter than love ever could. I was 12 the year this happened. Old enough to listen, too young to be noticed. It was a family gathering, one of those perfectly orchestrated events where the furniture was more comfortable than the people sitting on it. The dining room gleamed like it had been polished for royalty. Even the servants moved quietly, like they were afraid of disturbing the air. I was sitting at the end of the table, the place reserved for children and people who didn't matter. My uncle was in full performance mode, retelling one of his favorite stories, the kind that started comedy and ended as confession. He was talking about money, of course. Men like him always were. Between mouthfuls, he turned to my father and said, "You know, little A here's got it easy." He used my nickname, the one no one else dared to use in front of my father. My father didn't look up. He never looked up when my uncle spoke. My uncle smirked. "Come on, don't give me that look. We all know the boy's your project, the family's charity case." He laughed then, loud, open, infectious, the kind of laugh that fills a room like smoke. Everyone joined in, even my mother, though her eyes stayed on her glass. I didn't understand the words at first. Charity case. I thought he was joking, that maybe he meant something else. But then I saw my father's face, still, expressionless, the kind of silence that confirms what laughter denies. The words sank slowly, like stones in deep water. Charity case. It replayed in my head long after the laughter faded. I wasn't adopted, I wasn't illegitimate, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that somewhere along the line, the people who were supposed to call me son had started to call me favor. After dinner, I hid in the hallway outside, the study. I heard their voices through the half-open door, the sound of ice clinking in glasses, the low hum of secrets being traded like stock. "He's sensitive," my father said. "He's soft," my uncle replied. "You're spoiling him. He's my son." "Your mistake," my uncle said, laughing again. The word mistake cracked something in me that never healed properly. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how I could be both loved and pitied. I wondered what part of me felt like charity to them, the way I smiled too politely, the way I preferred books over business talk, or maybe just the fact that I didn't want to become them. People think the worst thing a rich man can say is no. They're wrong. The worst thing he can say is, "You owe me." I realized that night that love, in our family, was transactional. Every hug came with interest. Every compliment had fine print. My father bought me everything: schools, tutors, silence. But not once did he defend me when I needed him to. That's the thing about powerful men. They don't protect you from cruelty. They teach you to endure it quietly. We're close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Help me share these stories, not for sympathy, but for truth. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this silence travels. Later that night, I heard my father in his study, pacing. He didn't know I was standing outside the door again. He was on the phone, probably with my uncle. His voice was lower, tired. "He's not charity," he said. "He's my son." A pause, a sigh. "Yes, but sometimes it feels like it." That was the first time I hated him, not for what he said, but for how softly he said it, like resignation disguised as reason. In that moment, I understood something no 12-year-old should, that the people who give you everything can still make you feel like you deserve nothing. After that night, something subtle but irreversible shifted inside me. When I walked through the house, I began to notice things I'd never seen before. The cracks in the marble floor near the staircase, the faint scent of disinfectant that never quite left the hallways, the servants' eyes that flickered away whenever my father entered a room. It was as if the house itself had decided to stop pretending, and I stopped pretending with. At school, I started talking less. The other boys, the sons of men like my father, bragged about their ski trips and their father's new cars. I sat at the edge of their world, nodding when they spoke, laughing when I was supposed to, but I could feel that phrase still echoing in my chest like a curse. The family's charity case. It changed how I heard everything. Compliments began to sound like condolences. Every "you're lucky" felt like a knife coated in sugar. I began to test people. If someone asked what my father did, I'd lie. I'd say he was an architect or a lawyer, something ordinary, something safe. It was strange how much kinder people became when they thought I was ordinary. My uncle visited often after that dinner. He seemed to enjoy reminding my father that wealth wasn't the same as respect. He'd arrive in his noisy sports car, blasting music that didn't belong in neighborhoods like ours, and swagger through the door like a man convinced the world was his reflection. He was the family's embarrassment, but also its proof that money could polish anything, even arrogance. He'd pat me on the shoulder and say things like, "Don't take life so seriously, kid. You're not here to earn it. You're here to enjoy the leftovers." Leftovers, that's what I was to him, the soft remainder of someone else's fortune. Once, I asked my father why he kept inviting him back. "He's family," he said simply. "So am I replied. He didn't answer. My father hated confrontation the way some men hate mess. He preferred silence, the kind that made you question if you were the problem. It wasn't that he agreed with my uncle, it was that he didn't disagree enough. That was the way power worked in our family, not through words, but through their absence. A few months later, my uncle took me to lunch, his idea of bonding. We went to a restaurant where the waiters wore tuxedos and the menu didn't have prices. He ordered for both of us without asking. I sat there, watching the way people looked at him, not with admiration, but recognition. Everyone knew who he was, or at least who he wanted them to think he was. Halfway through the meal, he leaned in and said, "You know, your father was always jealous of me." I almost laughed. My father? Jealous of this man? But he kept talking. "He built walls," my uncle said, slicing his steak with surgical precision. "I built stories. He wanted power. I wanted fun. You can't have both." He poured himself another glass of wine. "You're too much like him though. Always thinking, always quiet. That's not how you survive in this family. You've got to laugh louder, drink faster, make people think you're bulletproof. Is that what you are?" I asked. He grinned, teeth flashing. "No, I just look the part." When the bill came, he handed the waiter a gold card and winked at me. "That's what charity looks like. Someone else paying for your silence." It was a joke, but I felt my stomach turn. That afternoon, I walked through city alone. Every reflection in every glass building looked like someone I didn't recognize. Versions of myself that hadn't been humiliated. I thought about my uncle's laughter, my father's silence, and my mother's distant eyes that seemed to apologize for both. That's when I realized something. Pity was more dangerous than hate. Hate was honest. Pity was polite. At home that evening, I found my father in his study. He was on the phone, voice low, precise. When he saw me, he covered the receiver. "Yes, I saw Uncle today," I said. He nodded once, waiting. He called me the family's charity case again. He exhaled through his nose, as if the sentence bored him. "You shouldn't take things he says seriously." "I think you do," I said. His eyes lifted, calm, cold. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you didn't defend me." He set the phone down slowly, like someone putting away a weapon. "You want me to protect you from words. I want you to see me." He stared at me for a long time, and for a moment, I thought I saw something crack, not emotion, but recognition. Then he said, "When you stop needing to be seen, that's when you'll deserve to be." I left before. I could cry. That night, I dreamed of being at the dining table again, my uncle laughing, my father quiet, and me, invisible between them. I woke up drenched in sweat, feeling smaller than ever. In the morning, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. When I passed my father's office, he was reading the paper, as always. He didn't ask where I was going. Maybe he already knew. I walked until the city turned into suburbs, and the suburbs turned into fields. I ended up at a small train station. I bought a ticket with money I'd hidden from my allowance. The first decision I'd ever made without asking permission. The train moved slowly, almost kindly. As the city disappeared behind me, I realized I wasn't running away from them. I was running toward myself. That was the day I stopped being their charity. I hadn't yet learned who I was, but at least I knew who I wasn't. Years passed before I saw either of them. Time didn't heal anything. It just rearranged the pain into shapes I could carry. I studied, worked, traveled, trying to live a life that didn't look like theirs. But distance doesn't erase family. It only sharpens the outline, what you're escaping. By the time I returned, the house was smaller, not literally, but emotionally. The gardens were trimmed, the staff replaced, the laughter extinct. My mother had grown quieter. My father had grown older in the way powerful men do, not fragile, but faded. He'd lost something I couldn't name, and I didn't have the heart to ask what. The first time I saw my uncle again was at a gala, one of those endless charity events where people dress like saviors while sipping champagne. I hadn't planned to go, but an old friend convinced me. It'll be good for you to be seen. I should have known that was a warning, not advice. When I entered, I spotted him instantly. The same gold watch, the same careless grin. Time had not humbled him. It had simply polished his arrogance. He saw me before I could look away. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son," he said, laughing, glass already half empty. "We thought you joined a monastery or something." "I tried," I said. "Too peaceful." He roared with laughter and slapped my back so hard my drink nearly spilled. "Still soft, I see." I smiled. "Still loud." He didn't notice the jab. Men like him rarely do. As the evening went on, he introduced me to people I'd never met. Investors, socialites, women who smiled with teeth but not eyes. Every introduction carried a smirk, a hint of amusement. "This is my nephew," he'd say. "You remember the story, the one who ran off to find himself." Every laugh felt like a small theft. But the final blow came later, after too many drinks, when he leaned close and said, "You know, you should thank me. You gave this family something to gossip about for years. Your father said losing you was his biggest act of generosity." He laughed again, that same terrible, thoughtless sound, and something inside me snapped. I didn't shout. I didn't throw a punch. I just looked at him, really looked, for the first time. The wrinkles around his mouth weren't from smiling. They were from sneering. His eyes were small, glossy, afraid, and I realized that laughter was his only armor. "You should be careful," I said quietly. "One day you'll choke on your own amusement." He didn't understand. Of course he didn't. Men like him mistake volume for truth. I left early that night. The city air felt heavy, thick with all the things people say to feel important. I walked for hours, until the lights blurred into a single golden smear across the horizon. When I finally reached home, there was a message from my father waiting on the answering machine. His voice older, slower, tired. "We need to talk," he said. "Your uncle's in trouble." It was the only time he ever asked for help. A week later, the scandal broke. My uncle had been caught embezzling from one of the family's charities, the same foundation he'd once called his greatest legacy. Money meant to build schools had vanished into private accounts. The newspapers loved it. The public loved it even more. For days, the story dominated headlines. The hypocrite philanthropist, the family that sold compassion. And there, in the center of it all, was his laugh, replayed in every memory I had, echoing in every word printed about him. My father called me again. "We can't let this destroy us," he said. "We have to control the narrative." I met him at the house, the same study, the same air of curated calm. He looked smaller, not physically, but morally. His empire wasn't collapsing, but it was tilting, like a structure finally realizing its foundation was hollow. He asked me to stand by him, to defend the family's name publicly. "You owe us that much," he said. I remember the way the word "owe" rolled off his tongue, the same way my uncle had said charity years before. It wasn't a request, it was a reminder of ownership. I told him no. His face didn't move, just his eyes, small, furious, flickered. "You would betray your blood?" I smiled faintly. "You taught me how." For the first time in my life, I saw something break in him. His voice cracked, just slightly. "You don't understand what this family has sacrificed for you." "No," I said. "I understand exactly what it sacrificed. Its soul." I left before he could answer. 2 weeks later, my uncle was gone. Heart attack, they said. The papers called it stress-related, though I think it was laughter finally running out of breath. The funeral was smaller than anyone expected. No cameras, no grandeur, just a handful of people who'd once called him dear friend, now pretending they'd never met him. My father didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at the coffin like it was a mirror. After the burial, as people drifted away, I lingered. I waited until the last car left, until the groundskeeper began clearing the... Then I whispered, "You were wrong about." It wasn't anger, it was relief. That night, back in my apartment, I poured myself a drink and turned off every light. The silence was thick, but honest. For the first time, I didn't hear his laughing. That's when I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. You don't escape your family by leaving them. You escape them by refusing to become what they made you believe you were. The day after my uncle's funeral, I woke up before sunrise. The city outside was quiet, the kind of silence that feels borrowed rather than earned. I sat by the window, watching the first lights spill between the buildings, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something, not for approval, not for forgiveness, not for belonging. My phone buzzed with messages. Reporters wanted statements. Distant relatives wanted reassurance that the scandal wouldn't stain the family name. Even the family's lawyer sent an email offering to draft a dignified response. I deleted them all, because what dignity is left when you have to pay people to believe it? That morning, I went back to the old house, not for nostalgia, for clarity. It had been years since I'd walked through those gates, years since I'd heard the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires of cars that cost more than most people's homes. The housekeeper recognized me instantly. Her face softened when she saw me. "You look like your mother," she said. No one had said that to me in years. My father was in his study, as always. The same desk, the same chair, the same view of the city that once obeyed him. But there was something different in the air, a kind of emptiness that money couldn't wallpaper. He didn't look up when I entered. "You came," he said. "I didn't come for you," I replied. "I came to say goodbye." He sighed, but didn't argue. "To what?" "To all of this." I gestured to the room, the mahogany shelves, the awards, the framed photographs of him shaking hands with men who were probably just as hollow. He set down his pen and looked at me for a long time. "You think walking away will make you pure? I think staying made you forget what purity was." He smiled, not kindly, but weakly. "You always had a talent for dramatics." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped confusing survival for pride." He leaned back in his chair. "Your uncle was a fool. He laughed at everything until the truth caught up to him. You, on the other hand, treat everything like a confession. There's no balance in that." "Maybe balance isn't the goal," I said. "Maybe honesty is." He didn't respond. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from carrying a crown made of ghosts. After a while, he said, "You think you're better than us." "No," I said. "I think I'm finally not one of you." The silence that followed was heavier than anger. It was the sound of something ancient breaking. Not a relationship, but an inheritance. When I left the house, the morning had turned bright. The sky was a cold blue, the kind that makes the city look almost honest. I walked down the long driveway slowly, letting the weight fall off me one breath at a time. Halfway to the gate, I stopped and turned back. From a distance, the house looked perfect, symmetrical, pristine, impossible, but I knew better now. It wasn't a home, it was a museum of control, and like all museums, everything inside it was dead. I spent the next few years building something smaller, something real. I moved to a quieter part of the city, one where names didn't matter. I started working with an organization that helped fund education for kids who'd grown up with nothing. The first time I handed a scholarship certificate to a teenager, he looked at me with disbelief, like he'd been waiting for the joke. I recognized that look. It was the same one I'd worn my whole life, the look of someone convinced they were a burden. "Don't thank me," I told him. "Just promise me one thing. Never let anyone make you feel like a favor." He nodded, and I realized that for the first time, I'd said something my father never could. At night, when the office emptied out, I'd stay behind, sitting by the window, watching the lights flicker across the city. The skyline still glittered, still whispered its promises of permanence. But now, I saw it for what it was, fragile, desperate, a monument to people who mistook power for love. Sometimes I'd hear laughter outside, from the street, from the cafes, from people living lives without marble floors or family names that opened doors. And it made me smile, because theirs was the kind of laughter that healed, not humiliated. My uncle's laugh had haunted me for years, but now I understood it. It wasn't strength, it was armor. He laughed because silence would have forced him to face himself. My father, on the other hand, never laughed at all, and maybe that was his punishment, to die with his mouth closed around every word he never said. I think about them both sometimes. Two men, trapped at opposite ends of the same inheritance. One loud, one quiet, both terrified of being ordinary. As for me, I've learned that ordinary isn't an insult, it's a relief. It's what freedom sounds like when you've spent your life surrounded by performance. People often ask why I keep recording these memories, why I dig up the ghosts of men who would rather stay buried. I tell them it's not revenge, it's archaeology. You can't build anything honest until you understand the ruins you came from. I don't hate my uncle and I don't even hate my father. I've stopped measuring them against what they could have been. They were products of their own fears, prisoners of expectations they mistook for truth. But I do pity them, the same pity they once reserved for me. Because pity, when it comes from compassion instead of arrogance, is another word for understanding. Sometimes when I finish recording, I sit in the dark with a glass of whiskey, the same way he used to. Only difference is, I let myself laugh, not to mock, not to hide, but to forgive. The laugh doesn't sound like his. It sounds like air returning to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. People think the opposite of wealth is poverty. They're wrong. The opposite of wealth is peace. I thought I was the family's charity case. I was wrong. I was its conscience. If this story made you think, subscribe, not for me, but for every child who grew up mistaking pity for love and learned that dignity is the only inheritance that lasts.